She only had minutes to save her daughter's life, so she stole a billionaire's Ferrari. When a desperate single mother risks everything to get her unconscious child to the hospital, she unknowingly ignites a scandal that could destroy her. But when the truth surfaces, the cold-hearted billionaire who called the police begins to question everything he thought he knew about loyalty, about love, and about the woman he nearly had arrested. The morning sun had barely begun to stretch its golden fingers across the city skyline when Maria Williams stood on the edge of the marble balcony of the penthouse, her daughter's small, frail body cradled against her side. The wind was crisp, teasing strands of her thick black hair loose from the tight bun she'd wrestled it into. Lila rested her head on Maria's shoulder, unusually quiet for a child who was usually bubbling with questions and stories before the day had even properly begun. Maria adjusted the strap of her bag on her other shoulder and stepped back into the living room of the penthouse. Everything around her gleamed: polished floors, glass sculptures, a grand piano that hadn't been touched in months. It was the kind of place where silence wasn't a pause, but a constant presence. Damien Locke's home was pristine and sterile, a place where nothing ever dared to be out of order. Maria was always careful here. She had worked for the billionaire for just under a year now, and in that time, she'd learned to walk softly, speak only when spoken to, and never linger in a room longer than necessary. But today, everything was different. She glanced down at Lila, whose skin looked even dull under the fluorescent ceiling lights. Her daughter's breath was shallow, but steady. There was no fever, no cough, no obvious sign of illness, just a lingering dullness, and that drained look that kept Maria's stomach twisted with unease. She hadn't planned on bringing Lila with her today. In fact, she'd spent most of the night trying to find someone who could watch her for a few hours. A neighbor, an old friend, anyone. But everyone had excuses. The woman in the next apartment was leaving for work. Another neighbor said she was sick herself. And Maria couldn't risk leaving Lila with someone she didn't trust. So here they were. Just for a few hours, Maria whispered to her daughter, setting her gently on the long suede couch near the window. "I'll keep you close, I promise." Lila didn't respond. She just blinked slowly, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Maria's heart hammered as she pulled a small blanket from her tote and laid it over Lila's legs. She'd packed snacks, water, her favorite stuffed toy, every small comfort she could think of. Still, unease clawed at her. Something didn't feel right, and no amount of soothing her daughter was making it go away. The silence was interrupted by the faint sound of the elevator doors opening. Maria stood upright quickly, smoothing the wrinkles in her blouse. Damien had left early that morning for a meeting, but staff still came in and out. She didn't want anyone thinking she was neglecting her duties. "Just rest, okay?" she murmured to Lila, giving her a soft kiss on the forehead before moving toward the kitchen. Her hands began their routine dance, washing fruit, wiping down countertops, organizing the untouched breakfast dishes. But her mind was somewhere else entirely. She kept glancing back toward the couch, where Lila sat quietly, head resting on a throw pillow, her little arms folded under her chin. It was the stillness that frightened Maria the most. Lila was never still. Even sick, she usually wanted to be held, or asked for cartoons, or begged for a story. This quiet felt unnatural. Time passed slowly, ticking through tasks and stolen glances. Maria tried to tell herself she was overthinking, that maybe it was just a virus or a long night. Children had bad days. But no matter how many times she tried to convince herself, her instincts whispered louder. Something was wrong. The weight of guilt began to press heavily against her chest. She shouldn't have brought her here. What if something happened? What if she couldn't act fast enough? What if this wasn't just a pale day, but something serious? She wrung out a cloth and wiped the counter for the third time, barely noticing the motion anymore. Every second that passed felt like a betrayal. But she couldn't leave. She needed this job. Every dollar she made kept a roof over their heads and food in Lila's belly. And if Damien ever found out she'd brought her daughter into the penthouse without permission. She swallowed hard and returned to the living room. Lila's eyes were now closed. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but rhythmic. Maria knelt beside the couch, brushing hair away from her daughter's forehead. "Tell me what's wrong," she whispered, her voice breaking. But there was no answer. Only the steady, frightening silence. The clock on the far wall read 10:17 a.m. Maria didn't know how many times she'd looked at it, hoping the hands would move faster so she could get through her shift and get Lila to a doctor. Any doctor. But time, as it often does when anxiety clings to the air, dragged its feet. She was in the master bedroom now, folding the perfectly dry-cleaned silk shirts Mr. Locke had left out. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, crease, fold, align. But her ears strained for any sound from the living room. Every few seconds, she'd pause and listen. Nothing. Still nothing. Her gut twisted again. She dropped the last shirt into the drawer and turned back toward the hallway. That's when she heard it. A soft, sickening thump. Then silence. Maria didn't hesitate. She sprinted down the hall, her flats slapping against the polished floors. The sound had been small, but it was the kind of sound that didn't belong in the controlled silence of this apartment. When she turned the corner into the living room, time stopped. Lila lay on the marble floor beside the couch, her tiny body curled unnaturally, one arm bent beneath her. "Oh my God!" Maria dropped to her knees beside her daughter, her hands trembling as she gently turned her over. "Lila! Lila, baby, wake up!" There was no response. Her eyes fluttered weakly, then rolled back. Maria's breath caught in her throat. No. No, no, no. She was a mother. She'd faced scraped knees, fevers, tantrums, sleepless nights. But this stillness, this was something else. This was danger. She felt a scream rising in her chest, but there was no time for panic. She looked around frantically, her mind racing. Phone. Hospital. Help. Car. She had no car. But Damien did. She stood suddenly, scooping Lila into her arms, the child's limp weight folding into her chest. Maria staggered slightly, surprised at how heavy her daughter felt in that moment. Every instinct told her to run. And so she did. The study. She remembered where Mr. Locke kept the spare keys. It was one of the few times she'd ever been in that room. She hadn't been allowed to clean it unless given explicit permission, but she'd seen him once, pressing a button behind a bookshelf. Maria burst into the study, careful not to jostle Lila too much. She reached the far wall, her eyes scanning the shelves. She ran a hand along the middle section, then pressed lightly on a carved wooden panel. Click. The panel gave way, revealing a small black keypad and a glass case containing 3 key fobs. She grabbed the first one. There was no time to guess. Clutching Lila tightly, Maria ran to the elevator. She pressed the garage button with the side of her hand, too afraid to let go of her daughter even for a second. The elevator ride was agony, silent and slow, the floor numbers lighting up one by one. Finally, the doors slid open. Rows of sleek, shining cars lined the private garage. It smelled like leather and polish and fuel. Maria pressed the key fob. Beep beep. The sound came from her left. A bright red Ferrari blinked its headlights, the prancing horse logo glinting under the fluorescent lights. A supercar. Of course. It didn't matter. She ran to it, yanked the passenger door open, and placed Lila as gently as she could on the low leather seat. The child moaned faintly, her eyes still closed. "Hold on, baby," Maria whispered, voice cracking. She circled to the driver's side, opened the door, and slid behind the wheel. The engine roared to life with a touch of the ignition button, the sound deep and thunderous. She didn't know how to drive a Ferrari, but she knew how to drive. Maria gritted her teeth, threw the car into gear, and pressed the accelerator. The tires squealed against the concrete as she tore out of the garage, heart pounding, eyes blurring with tears. Somewhere, far above, in a boardroom overlooking the city, Damien Locke's phone was buzzing. And Maria, a single mother desperate to save her daughter, was driving his favorite car straight toward the unknown. The conference room on the top floor of Locke Industries was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the quiet tapping of laptop keys. Damien Locke sat at the head of the long glass table, dressed in a charcoal suit, eyes fixed on a financial projection on the screen in front of him. Around him sat a half-dozen executives, each one careful with their words, cautious in tone. He liked precision. He demanded it. Q3 saw a 10-point drop in international sales, one of the VPs was saying, primarily due to the delayed rollout in Singapore. Damien's phone vibrated once in his breast pocket. He ignored it, but we expect a recovery by early Q4. The team is all ready. Another buzz. Then a third. Damien sighed quietly, then pulled the phone from his pocket and glanced at the screen. Security alert, vehicle access breach, penthouse garage. His brow furrowed. A second notification popped up immediately after. Ferrari 812 superfast in motion. Driver unverified. What the hell? Damien muttered, sitting straighter. He tapped into the security app. A real-time map showed the vehicle speeding down a surface street. Then came a still frame, a blurry security cam photo from the garage entrance. A woman holding something in her arms, jumping into his car. The image sharpened. Damien's heart stuttered. Pause the meeting, he said, his voice sharper than usual. The room quieted instantly. Heads turned. Is everything all right, sir? Someone asked. But Damien was already rising. He pressed a button on the side of his phone. Connect me to building security. Now. A pause. Then a click. Mr. Locke, the head of security answered. Who accessed my Ferrari? There was hesitation. We're reviewing the footage, but from what we can tell, it was the maid. Maria William. A strange pause filled the line. She was holding something. Looked like a child. What? Damien barked, stepping into the hallway, walking swiftly now. Why the hell would she take my car? We're unsure, sir. But the alert was triggered because her access is limited to residential floors. She bypassed a restricted area. The car was taken without authorization. And you let her drive out of the garage? She was in a panic, sir. We assumed she might be fleeing with a child. Should we involve the police? Damien hesitated for a half-second, long enough for the wrong assumptions to dig in. Yes. Report the car as stolen. Give them the plates and GPS feed. Understood. He hung up the call and paced into his office, slamming the door shut behind him. His mind was racing. Maria. Quiet, punctual Maria. Always polite, always careful not to cross boundaries. She barely even spoke to him outside of reporting her tasks. She blended into the background like furniture, which, if he were honest, was exactly how he preferred his staff. And now she'd taken his most prized possession? He looked toward the wall where a large photograph of the Ferrari hung, a shot taken on the coast of Amalfi. That car had cost more than most people would earn in a decade. And now it was being driven, by someone without permission, into who knows what kind of traffic or danger. He gritted his teeth and opened his laptop, pulling up the GPS tracking dashboard. The Ferrari was now approaching Midtown, near the University Hospital district. Odd. He zoomed in further. The car was parked outside St. Anne's Memorial Hospital. A cold prickle ran across the back of his neck. Why there? His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from the building's concierge. Sir, just confirmed with staff. Maria was seen entering the penthouse early this morning with her daughter. Damien's jaw tightened. So this was about the child? He blinked and ran a hand down his face. No one had told him she'd brought a child in. It wasn't allowed. His penthouse wasn't a daycare. But if she hadn't meant to steal the car, why wouldn't she just call an ambulance? Unless she panicked. Still, rules were rules. And she had taken his vehicle without permission. She could have wrecked it, been arrested, injured someone, or gotten herself and the kid killed. He closed the GPS map. This wasn't just about a car. It was about trust, boundaries, control. And right now, he had none of them. The moment Maria pulled into the emergency bay, the car doors flew open like wings in a storm. Nurses in scrubs rushed out, one of them already rolling a stretcher. The Ferrari's engine was still running, its low growl completely out of place in the chaos of an emergency entrance. The car's bright red body reflected the harsh hospital lights, drawing stares from staff and bystanders alike. Maria barely noticed. She sprang from the driver's seat and scrambled to the passenger side, her hands fumbling with the door handle. Lila's head lolled softly as Maria cradled her into her arms again. "Please, please help her," Maria cried, running toward the nearest nurse, her voice cracking with fear. She collapsed. "She hasn't spoken since this morning. She's not breathing properly, she's—" "Ma'am, come with me," a nurse said calmly but urgently. "We've got her. Just stay close." Maria followed as the nurse guided her toward the automatic doors. The stretcher wheeled alongside them. 2 more nurses lifted Lila gently out of her arms. For the first time, Maria let go, physically but not emotionally. Her arms still felt the shape of her child long after Lila had been rolled out of reach. Then, just as they pushed through the ER doors, "Stop right there," a voice shouted behind her. Maria froze. 2 uniformed police officers stood at the edge of the emergency bay, hands resting near their holsters. A third had just stepped out of a black and white patrol car, eyes sharp, already looking between Maria and the Ferrari she'd abandoned half on the curb. "You, ma'am, what's your name?" one of the officers asked. Maria's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded harder than it had during the drive. I'm Maria. Maria William. Please, my daughter, she needs help." "I didn't mean to." "Step to the side, ma'am. We've got a report of a stolen vehicle. Red Ferrari, license plate 4XC 1917. That your car?" No. It's not mine. I took it. I mean, yes, but only because I needed to get her here." She collapsed. "So you admit to taking the vehicle without permission?" The officer's voice wasn't cruel, but it was firm, official. Maria nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, but please. I didn't steal it. I work for Mr. Locke. I clean his penthouse. He wasn't home. My daughter was dying. What else was I supposed to do?" The 2 officers exchanged glances. One of them looked past her toward the hospital entrance, where Lila had disappeared behind the white swing doors. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step aside and answer some questions." "I will. I swear. I'll tell you everything, but please let me stay until I know she's okay. Just let me see her, just for a minute. She's all I have." The trembling in her voice gave her away. The officer hesitated. It was a crossroads, a protocol-bound moment that could have gone in a colder direction. But then one of the nurses reappeared. She glanced at the officers, then back at Maria, recognition dawning on her face. "She's the mother?" the nurse asked. The younger officer nodded. "She brought the girl in. Drove a Ferrari. She got here just in time. We're stabilizing the child now. Could have been much worse if she'd waited." Maria let out a choked sob and pressed her hand over her mouth. The nurse stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Maria's arm. "Come. Just for a moment. You can see her through the glass." The police said nothing as Maria followed the nurse through the hospital doors. Her steps were unsteady. Every nerve in her body was tuned to one thing: the small figure lying in the hospital bed beyond the glass partition. Lila's body looked even smaller now, surrounded by wires and machines. An oxygen mask covered half her face, and 4 tubes ran into her arms. But she was breathing. A nurse adjusted a monitor beside her, nodding quietly to another. "She's going to be okay," the nurse beside Maria said softly. She was dehydrated and her blood sugar was dangerously low. "Did you know she has type 1 diabetes?" Maria's lips parted in shock. "What? No, I didn't. No one ever told me." "She must have had a drop in glucose levels. That's likely what caused her to faint. It's manageable, but she'll need regular care and monitoring from now on." Maria sank into the nearby chair, as if her body had finally caught up with the day's weight. She didn't even notice the police step away to make a call. Across town, Damien's phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end was different. More cautious. More measured. "Mr. Locke, we've located your vehicle. And it's been secured at St. Anne's Memorial Hospital." "Was the woman arrested?" A pause. "She wasn't trying to steal it, sir. She was trying to save her daughter." Damien sat back slowly in his chair. The words echoed in the quiet of his office. And for the first time that day, something unfamiliar stirred in him. Not anger, not betrayal, but a gnawing, uncomfortable sense of shame. Damien Locke sat alone in his office, the city sprawling out beneath the tall windows behind him. The skyline blinked with the slow pulse of afternoon lights, but he didn't see it. He didn't even see the paperwork laid out across his desk. The quarterly reports, the shareholder memos, the pending acquisitions. None of it mattered right now. His phone was still in his hand, the last words from the officer looping in his head like a haunting echo. She was trying to save her daughter. Not steal. Not run away. Not betray. Save. He set the phone down carefully on the polished mahogany surface. It clicked softly against the wood. So quiet, yet it broke the stillness like thunder. Damien stood slowly, walking to the bar cart by the window. He poured himself a drink, just one, and swirled the amber liquid thoughtfully before placing the glass back down untouched. He didn't want it. He wanted answers. Or maybe to correct something that had gone deeply wrong. He reached for his coat. The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and tired hope. The chairs were too hard, the lights too bright. Maria sat in one of them, hunched forward, hands locked together tightly on her lap. The adrenaline from earlier had long since faded, replaced by a dull ache that throbbed behind her eyes and down her spine. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't cried. She was too scared to do either. She didn't know if she was about to be arrested, or fired, or both. The only thing that anchored her was the knowledge that Lila was alive. Sleeping, yes. Fragile, yes. But alive. The doctors had confirmed it. Lila had type 1 diabetes. The crash earlier that day was caused by a dangerous blood sugar drop, undiagnosed, untreated. Maria blamed herself. She should have noticed the signs, should have seen this coming. But how could she? She was a cleaner, not a nurse. She worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and hadn't had the luxury of pediatric specialists or routine checkups. She had done the best she could with what she had. But sometimes the best didn't feel like enough. The sliding doors at the entrance opened with a hiss. She didn't look up at first. There had been a steady stream of nurses and orderlies coming and going all day. But then everything in the room seemed to shift. The sound of hard shoes on linoleum floors. The quiet hush that followed, as if the very air recognized someone important had entered. Maria turned slowly. Damien Locke stood just inside the doorway, his coat still draped over his shoulders, a look on his face she had never seen before. Not at the penthouse. Not during his rushed greetings or clipped instructions. He looked human. Tired. Unsure. Their eyes met. Maria stood immediately, her mouth parting. Mr. Locke, He raised a hand. Please. Don't. She fell silent. I just came from the garage, he said, voice quieter than she expected. I saw the footage. The way you ran with her. The way you looked. Maria swallowed hard. I know I had no right, she whispered. But I didn't know what else to do. I panicked. She collapsed. I thought she was dying. I understand now, Damien replied. He looked away briefly, as if the full weight of the truth had finally landed on his shoulders. I thought you were stealing from me. I involved the police. I assumed the worst, and I'm sorry. Maria blinked, stunned. I didn't think you'd come, she said quietly. I thought after all that happened, you'd want me gone. I did, he admitted. At first. But then I realized. I never really knew you. Not as a person. You've been in my home for almost a year. Always quiet. Always invisible. I never asked about your life, your child, your struggles. I just saw the job. The tasks. He paused. But today I saw something else. I saw a mother. Maria's throat tightened. I'm not asking for anything, she said, fighting the crack in her voice. Not forgiveness. Not my job. I just want my daughter to get better. You won't have to worry about the hospital bills, Damien said simply. They've been taken care of. Maria froze. What? I made arrangements with the hospital administrator. Everything from today's admission to the treatment she'll need going forward. It's covered. She stared at him, speechless, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't know how to thank you," she managed, tears finally brimming. "You already have," Damien replied, "by reminding me what matters." They stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of the day heavy between them. Then Damien looked past her, toward the pediatric wing. "May I see her?" Maria hesitated, then nodded. "She's sleeping now. But she'd like you." Damien offered the barest hint of a smile. "I'd like her too." Later, when they stepped quietly into the dim hospital room, the machines beeped steadily beside Lila's bed. Her cheeks had regained some color, and her tiny chest rose and fell in peaceful rhythm. Damien stood beside her for a long time, hands in his pockets, silent. Maria watched him watching her daughter, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. The white hospital walls, once sterile and unwelcoming, began to feel like a second home. Day after day, Maria sat beside Lila's bed, brushing her daughter's hair back from her forehead, whispering stories, singing lullabies under her breath. With every passing hour, color returned to Lila's cheeks, her eyes grew brighter, and the quiet room began to fill again with the faint echoes of a child's voice. And then there was Damien. He came the next day, then the next, and the next, not with assistants or bodyguards or grand gestures. He came alone, dressed in simple clothes, a cup of juice or a coloring book in his hand. And though his first visit had been quiet and unsure, by the third day he was sitting at Lila's bedside, helping her piece together a jigsaw puzzle shaped like a jungle scene. "Do tigers really eat people?" Lila had asked, poking at a puzzle piece with a small orange paw on it. "Only the rude ones," Damien replied solemnly. Lila giggled. Maria, watching from the chair in the corner, hadn't laughed like that in months. At first, she didn't know what to make of his visits. She kept her distance, not out of resentment, but uncertainty. What did he want? Pity? Redemption? To smooth things over and move on with his guilt cleanly wiped? But that wasn't it, because Damien stayed. Not just for 5 minutes to check in. He stayed for hours. He asked the nurses questions. He brought sugar-free treats approved by the dietitian. He even memorized the glucose monitor's alarm tones and knew when Lila needed juice without being told. Maria watched this powerful, polished man, who once lived in suits and boardrooms, sit cross-legged on the hospital floor, letting Lila braid his hair with mismatched rubber bands while she told him all about the cartoon she liked where vegetables talked and saved the world. He never looked at the clock, never acted impatient, and slowly something changed. One afternoon, Lila reached for Damien's hand instead of Maria's when she was scared of the nurse with the needle. Maria had bristled for a moment, but then saw the way Damien's face softened, how he squeezed the tiny hand gently, reassuring her daughter with a strength Maria didn't expect. "He's kind," Lila whispered to Maria that night as she fell asleep. "I like him." Maria tucked the blanket under her chin. "Yeah," she murmured, brushing hair from her daughter's brow. "I think I do too." The hospital routine grew gentle, even joyful in pockets. In the mornings, Maria would arrive early after a quick change at the shelter for overnight parents. She'd wash her face in the cold basin water and pray softly beneath her breath. For strength, for healing, for a second chance. Then came breakfast, fingerstick checks, insulin injections, nutrition briefings. But woven through the clinical routines were Damien's quiet acts of compassion. He brought Lila her favorite bedtime story in hardcover one day, and another day, he arrived with 3 tiny plush animals from a limited edition zoo collection. Because one shouldn't be lonely, he'd said. He never spoke of work. Never made her feel small. In fact, he asked Maria questions. About her life. Her childhood. The books she used to read. What Lila was like as a baby. How she managed to do everything on her own for so long. At first, she offered short answers. But eventually, the words flowed. She told him about the night she gave birth alone, how her mother had died young, how cleaning wasn't a passion but a lifeline. She told him about nights she went without dinner so Lila wouldn't have to, and mornings where she walked 4 miles in cheap shoes just to be on time. He didn't flinch. He didn't patronize. He listened. Sometimes he'd grow quiet afterward, eyes far away, as though trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the invisible version he'd never bothered to see before. One evening, after a long day of appointments and diabetes education classes, Maria found herself in the hospital courtyard, seated beside Damien on a stone bench. The sun was setting behind the trees. Lila was inside, asleep, clutching the new stuffed elephant Damien had brought her. "Do you know what surprised me the most?" Damien said, looking ahead. Maria glanced sideways. "What?" "That I was afraid of the wrong things." She furrowed her brow. "I was afraid of losing a car," he said softly. "A piece of metal. An engine. But I wasn't afraid of how blind I'd become. To people. To real lives. To yours." Maria didn't reply right away. The quiet between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was reflective. "I never wanted charity," she said eventually. "I know. I just wanted her to live. And because of you," Damien said, turning to her, "she will." By the time the 10th day rolled around, Lila was laughing again. Her skin glowed, her appetite returned, and the nurses had begun referring to her as their little celebrity. Damien brought in a small speaker one afternoon, and the three of them danced, awkwardly, freely, in the middle of her room while music played. Maria never would have believed, 2 weeks ago, that she'd laugh while wearing hospital visitor socks and watching a billionaire hop in rhythm with a 5-year-old to a silly pop song. But here she was, and she didn't want the music to end. The day of Lila's discharge dawned soft and golden, as though the sky itself had heard the news. Sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, catching in the folds of white curtains and dancing across the tiled floor. It was the kind of morning that felt like a quiet promise. Maria stood at the edge of the hospital bed, packing the last of Lila's things into a donated overnight bag. A pink one with little yellow stars and a zipper that stuck every time you tried to close it too quickly. She had folded the stuffed animals neatly. Damien had given her more than she could count. Lila sat on the bed, legs swinging in her new jeans and little canvas shoes, brushing her stuffed elephant's ears gently. "Do we have to leave?" she asked, not with fear, but with the tender hesitation of a child who had grown comfortable in a space that had once scared her. Maria paused. "Yes, baby. It's time. But will he still visit us?" Maria followed her daughter's gaze. Damien stood just outside the door, speaking with the nurse at the station. He wasn't in a suit again, just a dark sweater and slacks, his coat folded over one arm. The usual polish was still there, but something inside him had softened these past 2 weeks. It wasn't just his voice. It was the way he looked at people now, like he actually saw them. "He might," Maria answered, brushing her daughter's curls with her fingers. "If we let him." Lila smiled, and Maria realized, as she had many times lately, how fast children grow when they're surrounded by care. Minutes later, paperwork signed and goodbyes given, they stepped through the automatic hospital doors and into the sunlight. Damien had insisted on handling the arrangements. A sleek black SUV, not a Ferrari, waited at the curb. The driver opened the door, and Lila climbed in with a bounce. Maria hesitated. "Thank you for everything," she said to Damien. His expression was unreadable for a moment, serious, almost too still. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You saved her. All I did was catch up." She smiled softly. "You did more than that." He glanced toward the car, where Lila was now playing with the control buttons on the seat and grinning. "I meant what I said," Damien continued, "about the hospital bills. But also more than that." Maria tilted her head. "You shouldn't have to go back to cleaning penthouses for scraps," he said. "You deserve better. And your daughter deserves to see you come home with energy, not exhaustion." She exhaled slowly. "That would be nice. There's a position at Locke Industries. My office. Personal assistant. The job comes with benefits. A flexible schedule. Health insurance." Maria's heart thumped. "You don't have to accept it," he said quickly. "But the offer is real. You're capable. You're intelligent. And you've managed more chaos and crisis than most executives I've interviewed." Maria searched his face. He wasn't saying it to impress her. He meant it. Are you sure? She asked. You know who I am. He smiled faintly. And I know who you're not. You're not invisible. Not to me. Not anymore. She swallowed hard. There was no pity in his voice. No savior complex. Just a quiet recognition of her strength, and a desire to help without strings attached. I'll think about it, she said. I hope you'll say yes. They arrived at the apartment complex Maria used to pass by every day on the way to her second cleaning job. She never imagined living in it. Yet Damien had arranged a lease for a small, cozy unit with 2 bedrooms, fresh paint, and clean light. There were fresh groceries in the fridge. A welcome basket on the kitchen table. A little handwritten card from Damien's office assistant. Welcome home, Lila and Maria. Maria stood in the center of the small living room and closed her eyes. No more cockroach traps. No more shared bathroom at the shelter. No more choosing between insulin and electricity. Just space. Safety. A future. Lila ran across the carpet and twirled. Can we get a puppy now? She asked. Maria laughed, the sound full and light. One miracle at a time, sweetheart. The weeks passed. Maria accepted the job. She started working part-time at first, slowly adjusting to the rhythm of an office, the feel of polished shoes instead of cleaning gloves. Damien introduced her not as the maid who saved my car, but as Maria William, our newest hire, sharp as hell and already running my calendar better than I ever could. Lila started school. With a medical alert bracelet on her wrist and a nurse familiar with her condition, she fit in better than Maria had dared to hope. Damien checked in every few days, not just with Maria, but with Lila. Sometimes with a bag of school supplies, sometimes just to say hello. And Lila? She beamed every time he did. One quiet Friday evening, Maria stood on the balcony of her new apartment, the city twinkling around her like an open sky full of answers. Behind her, laughter erupted as Damien helped Lila untangle headphone cords and read instructions to build a toy robot. Maria sipped her tea and leaned against the railing. She'd once stood on the balcony of his penthouse, holding a sick child and drowning in fear. Now she stood on her own balcony, in a home she hadn't dreamed of daring to hope for. And inside, her daughter laughed freely. No IVs, no fear, just light. Maybe life had a way of giving back. Not always quickly, but beautifully when it finally did. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.